and welcome to RED's virtual cinematography series. I'm Nada Albright and I work with filmmakers for RED. Today we have the pleasure of talking to the cinematographer Erik Messerschmidt. He is a member of the prestigious American Society of Cinematographers. And today we're going to talk to him about his recent work on Mindhunter, Season 2. We're going to talk about a few of his shots that were directed by David Fincher and Carl Franklin, and he's going to walk us through each one. Erik? Welcome.
Hi, Nada. How are you?
Good.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It's nice to have you.
Of course.
Season 2 of Mindhunter is unsettling, absorbing, and meticulous. It's set in the 1970s, and I'd like to talk first, Erik, about the overall visual sensibility of Mindhunter. There's an organized structure that I think lends to the dark and complex characters, the main characters, their natures. How do you achieve this rigorous aesthetic?
Well, it's a lot of work. David and I felt that the show would be successful if we use some restraint in our storytelling process. And I think, the show is about discovery, and it's about exploring, the innermost sections of people's brains, particularly violent criminals. So we wanted to be really respectful to that and be cautious about how we told the story and not exploitive, obviously. And the show is not horror. It's not meant to exploit that at all. It's meant to be pretty cerebral. So we felt that one way that we could help that was to be really reserved in how we told the story. And so we kind of restricted our tool set to some extent. We shot on prime lenses, really like 3 or 4 focal lengths for the whole show. We very rarely move the camera. The show has kind of a limited color palette that we developed over the course of 2 seasons, and it did evolve. But I think the general look, if you will, of the show is really built on just kind of limiting our tool set and trying to work within a very specific set of boundaries and tell the story from that perspective. And then I think once you do that and you pull those pieces together and throw them in the soup, you get a very specific flavor, and it makes it easier to not deviate from that plan, when you're cautious and measured and reserved.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We have one of 4 clips, and the first one we're going to look at is a crime scene. Can you tell us, just kind of tee up a little bit of what we're going to look at, and then and we'll watch the clip in the entirety, and then we'll watch it again with you telling us about your work behind it.
Sure. Yeah, sure. This first clip, it's a they have just found some bodies on a remote road out in Atlanta, and this is a true story. This is not where they found them in reality, but we're retelling the story of some dead bodies, some murdered children that have been found. And this is sort of the first case that our characters are investigating. The first active case that our characters are investigating. So they're out in the real world. In previous episodes of the show, most of their investigation has been with already incarcerated prisoners. So they're getting the opportunity to apply some techniques, and our character Holden Ford is beginning to learn the political complexities of applying techniques in the real world. So he's interacting with a cop, and this particular scene had to be told at dusk, and it's relatively long. It's 3-4 minutes long, and it's a walk and talk. And for anyone who shot dusk scenes, they know that they can be complicated to time perfectly, and it had quite a bit of choreography necessary. So we did this as a result of a tremendous amount of rehearsal and practice until we got it perfect, and we sort of tried to time it right at the perfect moment of when the light was right where we wanted it to be.
Let's take a look at it.
Delta sector report.
Chief Redding, I feel like we...
Sir, chopper needs to refuel. We suggest suspending for the night.
All sectors suspend. Y'all start coming on in.
Copy that.
Nobody. Is that what you wanted to hear?
No, sir, it's not.
Bad if you don't find one. Worse if you do.
I wanted to say I feel like we started off wrong.
Could say that.
I only meant we don't want to waste your resources on every tip.
Over the past year, I've pulled children's bodies out of creek beds, woods, vacant buildings. Roger. We have thousands of acres of untended property. When we get any lead that narrows it to one road, I have no choice but to take it.
We've learned things about how these types of killers think. We can't anticipate them. Focus on their next move instead of just reacting.
We have a meeting Monday morning with all the jurisdictions. You have a way to narrow things down, happy to hear it. Now I have to go brief the mayor.
Chief Redding, has there been another body found? The FBI initiate this search.
Find a body?
Other information.
I have no statement at this time.
Was there a body found?
Did the FBI call for this search? Will the FBI work with APD, or are you running your own investigation?
There was a call from the killer.
Okay, so Eric, we're going to play it again, this time without the sound. And just, if you don't mind, walking us through it.
Sure. So the scene here opens with an aerial. This was shot from a drone, and it's meant to be a point of view from a helicopter because the helicopter is involved in the search, and you see it leaving there because they've had to call the search off with the waning daylight. They're all sort of exhausted at this point. And this scene is a good example of some of the flares we've introduced in the show in post. David and I really liked the quality of digital flares, and the ability to art direct them in post was fantastic. So we really took it here a little bit further than we had in previous episodes. You can see here, this is a oneer. So, part of the style of the show is this very objective camera that is meant to be this quiet observer. And this is a good example of just unbelievable operating by Brian Osmond, the A-camera operator, and Dwayne Barr, the dolly grip. You can see the camera starts and stops in perfect harmony with our actors, and that is just skill and practice.
Yeah.
And these guys are exceptional. This is, again, done after quite a bit of practice and rehearsal, so we can get all of the choreography done with all the extras and the performance beats, so that when we feel like we're ready, we can shoot at this perfect magic hour time of day. I think we laid 350 or 400 feet of dolly track on this hillside, so it was quite an undertaking. Here he turns up.
Yeah.
He's sort of starting to absorb the enormity of what's going on, and they recognize that he's an FBI agent and chase after him. And this is where we first introduce Wayne Williams, who ends up being a significant character, sort of the villain. That's him right there. That's the audience's first glimpse into a major character that we'll see a little bit further into the season.
I love that it's such a long shot, and how long did it take you guys to prep for that? What went into that whole setup? And the lighting was outside.
We read the scene in advance, and we had lots of discussions about how we were going to do it. And Carl Franklin, who directed the scene, knew he wanted to do it as one, or as few pieces of coverage as possible. And it had to take place at dusk because it was scripted that way. And the kind of precision that our show is known for and that we were trying to execute on a daily basis is not something that you accomplish in one or two takes or one rehearsal that we shoot. It requires a tremendous amount of patience. So we knew that, and Carl was aware of that, and so as a result he took the actors and they rehearsed it first on stage. We kind of replicated the street. He had picked the location actually months earlier. He knew where he wanted to shoot, and this was a good facsimile of what the real street looked like. So they paced it out and figured out where the beats for the scene were, so that Jonathan Groff and Albert could figure out what all the timing was.
Yeah.
then we took that to the street and then did further rehearsals, I think, on a Saturday, and Carl from there figured out where he wanted to put the police extras and the cars and the the dogs and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then we went there the day of the shoot. I think the Grips laid the track the day before, and we went there the day of the shoot around 1 o'clock after lunch, and we rehearsed all the way up until 5-6 p.m. And I think we shot that take at
Wow.
I think it's probably take 7 or 8, and we shot it right at the perfect time of day. So it was quite an undertaking to get the scene done, but it it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. How'd you stabilize it, by the way?
We put the camera on a Ronin gimbal, a Ronin 2, which we used a lot on the show. We had really good success with it. And the dolly track, because the road is on a hillside, we couldn't lay the dolly track perfectly level. So that was really our only option, was some sort of stabilized head. So Brian operated the shot from the wheels off the dolly, which made Dwayne, our dolly grip's life, a little easier too, because he wasn't moving Brian's weight around.
That's good.
Not that Brian is particularly heavy, but it's when you do many takes up and down the hill, it's not easy for those.
No doubt. Well, now, of course, this season, Mindhunter is set in the 1970s, and I listened to an interview that you did earlier, and you mentioned some films that, I don't know if you want to say influenced, but that you looked at. Can you tell me about those influence and kind of what was it about those looks that you were interested in seeking?
Sure. We wanted to reference the 70s, and we wanted to reference 70s cinema to some extent. And obviously we get away with a huge amount of that by costume design and art direction, obviously, and the picture cars. It's that does a huge it takes a huge amount of that off our hands as filmmakers, as visual storytellers anyway. But we watched David and I. David really wanted me to watch All the President's Men. He felt that was a good reference, which it is. And from a thematic standpoint and from a visual standpoint, and Gordon Willis's work in there has always been a huge influence for me. So that was pretty pivotal reference, I think, for us. And it is a good example of very patient filmmaking and nuance.
Yeah.
And we watched Mississippi Burning as well, which is not a movie of the 70s, but is of similar period and also similar style. So that I think those movies are all good examples. 3 Days of Condor is a good example as well. I think that was more a reference I used and watched. But and we looked at fine art photography too. We looked at Eggleston, we looked at Stephen Shore, and Stephen Shore's photographs of the period are also were a huge influence on the way the show looks.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that when I think about 3 Days of the Condor and All the President's Men. There seem to be these huge, busy sets with the actors just flying in and out of them. I mean, that's just something that makes me think of the same, where you guys have these big scenes, the FBI or their room, and people coming and going. It's similar to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think we try to look, the story is told in cuts to a large degree, and
yeah, right,
and static cameras, and and we do move the camera, and when we're trying to introduce some pace or some acceleration in the scene or what have you, or we're trying to punctuate a particularly pivotal moment dramatically, but we really made a concerted effort across the entire season with all the directors to kind of really limit the movement and let the performance play out in front of the camera as much as possible.
Yeah, it's really effective. So I've got another. It's a different scene, and I think you had a different set of challenges. It's the house when he pulls up, and he goes into a house where actually a terrible crime has occurred. Do you know which one that is?
I do. Yeah, this is the beginning of. This is one of the first scenes of episode 2. Mm-hmm. Yeah, directed by David Fincher.
Yeah, it's Fincher. Yeah, okay.
It is. Yeah.
So let's take a look at that one. Here we go.
303 North Edgemore, the Otero house. January 1974. They just moved in 2 months prior. It was a school day. Neighbors were coming and going all morning. One of them even saw BTK drive off in the family car afterwards. Women around here come home. First thing they do is check the phone still works. 5 years later. We think it came in here. 2 kids making their lunches. Over 3 had already gone to school.
They had 5 kids in this house.
Retired military. Used to base housing. No forced entry. The dog was in the yard when we got here.
It makes no sense to come into a house with an adult male and a dog.
Nothing makes sense. He took the money out of Mr. Otero's wallet, emptied her purse, and stole Mr. Otero's aviator's watch, but clearly robbery was not his motive.
And the driver's licenses were missing.
Yeah.
He was taking souvenirs. And he already knew what he wanted on his very first kill. So the dad would have been about here, tied to the foot of the bed. Police report said he was suffocated with a plastic bag and a t-shirt.
Later we found there was a hole in it. Mr. Otero managed to rip it with his teeth. Killer took the plastic bag off, put the t-shirt on over his head so he couldn't tear it again, and then put the bag back on.
Agonizing. And Mrs. Otero was on the bed. She had double ligature marks.
Must have come to, so he had to do it again. We think that since it was his first try, he botched it.
The kids must have been in here. They had to have seen everything.
We found the youngest boy on the floor, suffocated.
2 t-shirts and a bag. So the killer learned. Took no chances. He would have brought the little girl in here too. Couldn't leave her alone.
There was a chair here with deep carpet indentations. We think he sat to watch the boy die.
That would have taken...
Between 4 and 6 minutes. My partner and I were first on the scene. It was completely dark down here. He was feeling for a light when something bumped him. That's when we found the little girl hanging from this pipe.
Jesus.
Intense scene. This is character Bill Tench with a local cop pulling up to an old crime scene. David picked this location months in advance, and as you can see, they got the owners of the property to let the grass grow. So we let the grass grow for like 10 weeks or something. Interesting anecdote. We shot this in the morning. We had a very specific time window we thought it would look great in, and because we wanted this flare right here.
Love it.
So everything was sort of built around that position. And then they go inside, and when they go inside, we didn't shoot in the actual house. They built the interior of the house on stage because we had to scenic it. So this is now on stage with a green screen comp in the background. And now we've moved inside, and this is, entirely about space and Tench taking in this environment and envisioning this crime as he's going through the file with the cop. So we're trying to kind of show the environment, and it's actually not a very, very big set.
Yeah.
And there's an example there. So all the the carpeting and the floor is scenicked by Steve Arnold, our production designer. And I wanted to light the room entirely through the windows. There's obviously no practicals in this house. It's completely empty. So we talked a lot about the position of windows and the window treatments. We wanted it to feel kind of spooky but bright. There's a great example here. If you have the opportunity to see it in HDR, this scene is particularly good example of the advantages of HDR, because the window is so bright and still holds quite a bit of detail, and yet we are able to work with the fall off of the room pretty well. I think we had 18Ks and big diffusion rags outside all these windows, trying to replicate that kind of natural northern bright sunlight. The scene intercuts with the stuff in a plane. We had 2 planes on stage, and we had all sorts of different techniques for lighting interiors of planes. This one really liked the quality of when you're in a sunlit day airplane and you're landing through the clouds and the sun is sort of going through the clouds. So we pumped nitrogen into outside the windows through Ritter fans, and that's how we get this very frenetic lighting effect. It's not a dimmer effect or anything. It's actually just the shadow of the nitrogen clouds passing by the windows. The nice low angle prism 25 there. I think this scene, we deviated a little bit from our style. We usually kept the camera very nodal and square with the rooms, but we started to play a little bit, and David liked bringing the camera very low here. So some of these shots are much wider and much lower than we normally would.
Yeah, and literally in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. Here's some smoke in the basement. This is another set. Again, only lit through those windows. The smoke really saved my butt here and lifted the shadows just enough. He's showing where one of the victims was found tied to that pipe. It's pretty disturbing. But again, very subtle and quiet, trying to be, very nuanced. People who have seen the show are probably very familiar with the style, the camera style that we're using, and it is very quiet and calm, and we don't move the camera very much. And in the first season, a shot that did get a lot of attention and was quite effective for us dramatically was the very end when Holden runs out of the hospital room with Kemper, and we break our format and got into this handheld, very frenetic handheld shot. Which for us was a big step, because it was not something we had done the entire season, and we liked the way that affected the audience, because they were so used to our style when they were watching the show.
Right.
And Carl Franklin liked that as well, and our characters at this point in the show, in this clip, our characters are now very much involved in an active investigation, and there's a bit of a manhunt now looking for the perpetrator of these murders. And Carl felt that it was appropriate to deviate from the style a little bit as well here, as our characters get more and more entrenched in the real world, so to speak. So this clip here shows them looking for and ultimately coming across our sort of principal villain in the show, which is Wayne Williams. And again, we break from the style here as well.
Got it. All right, let's look at this last clip.
Wake up. Everyone's falling asleep out there.
Everyone's falling asleep in here. So these kids are vulnerable. They're hustling to survive. Some sell deodorizers. A few are in the trade. A lot of them know each other, which means they tell each other which parking lots to work.
And somebody knows exactly where to find them. It's not completely random. Some kids may know him.
He may not even have to hunt. If they're going to different houses,
There could be more than one him. Maybe I've been too
Myopic?
Yeah.
Everybody awake out there?
Campbell, Jacobs. You guys there? Yeah, we're here. Awake here. We're here.
I just heard a splash. Got anybody in a bridge up there? I just heard a loud splash.
Push out of the bridge. Checking it out now. Anybody else heard a splash? Yeah, white car.
Guys, clear this channel. We got a car. Lights just came on. Looks like he could have been stopped.
Yeah, here we go.
We got a white station wagon coming across the Cobb Parkway Bridge, east side. He's coming back across. I'm pulling out.
Let's get those lights on. Let's go.
Wayne Bertram Williams. Do you know why we pulled you over, Mr. Williams?
I guess it must be about all those boys.
It's really sad.
Yeah, got a little bit desensitized to it, you know, when you're doing this sort of thing. You know, it's like it has nothing to do with the visuals. It's just what you're hearing all day long. You know, you start to to remind yourself of the tragedy that's being discussed at every minute. You know.
Yeah.
It's not always easy. Yeah.
Well, why don't we start it from the beginning and let's have you run us through it again.
Sure. This is a location that we had found, again, months in advance, that David and Carl had talked about very early on. And in fact, we went and scouted, I think, 4 or 5 months before we shot it to really kind of break down where it was going to be and how much we needed to light. This particular sequence is a little bit bigger in scale than the show was used to. So we had to wrap our heads around it a little bit from a budget standpoint. This scene here, the day we shot this particular scene by the bridge, we had planned on shooting this interior on location with this very simple kind of 3-camera setup coverage. But we had very severe thunderstorms and we were kind of shooting between hail. So we shot plates for the interior, and this interior car is actually another example of something we did on stage with plates we shot on location, which was just a spur of the moment decision that we made in terms of managing the weather. So we matched the lighting on stage with the plates that we shot on location. You know, I really like this kind of burnt orange sodium vapor look, and Danny Gonzalez, the gaffer, and I had spent lots of time in testing trying to figure out that kind of desaturated, kind of degraded sodium vapor look. You see it again there on Holden and Tench's face on the front shots. And so we kind of found some gel combinations, and then for the LED lights we matched them, and it was quite a bit of testing. There's another example there. Here's a good example of the scope, lighting that entire bridge. And here in the scene, the audio, you hear the kind of using the police radio to accelerate the pace of the scene here from a storytelling standpoint. So we were again trying to keep the camera very stable, knowing that we were going to rely heavily on audio, and that was all Carl Franklin, really managing the script and knowing where the drama was. Another good digital flair from our friends in visual effects. We spent quite a bit of time in the DI perfecting that, David and I sending notes back and forth, and a little longer here, and this should be a little bit more saturated, or really track those headlights well. Here we get Holden and Tench coming out of the car, and it looks like a standard Mindhunter pullback on the dolly, very static, very, very well operated. And then as we pull back, we break in the handheld here. And the rest of the sequence is done on Brian Osmond's and Will Dearborn's shoulders, the operators. Again, kind of breaking the style for story effect.
Yeah.
Kind of fun.
Well, you're waiting for it the whole season, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, when are they gonna get him?
Yeah, you know. With patience comes satisfaction, hopefully, right?
It is very satisfying. And in fact, that brings us to our conclusion. I thank you so much for immersing us in this very complex and
you're very welcome
series, and we hope we get to do it again with you sometime.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for watching the show.